In this film, Nazım Hikmet is at your age. Do you want to be friends with him? Friends, this is Nazım Hikmet. I am known as the greatest poet of Turkish. I have written works in almost every field of literature. I was born in Thessaloniki in 1902. Among our family elders, there are many famous and successful people in the fields of art, military service, and government. My interest in poetry started thanks to my grandfather, Mehmet Nazım Pasha. My grandfather used to chat with his friends from Mevlevihane in the garden of his house and read poems from Mevlana. I would try to understand the speeches of the Mevlevis, and I would enjoy listening to these conversations. I also loved Anatolian tales and folk songs. I was listening to fairy tales and folk songs from the servants working in my grandfather's mansion. My father wanted me to be an engineer, a doctor, or a judge. According to him, I should have had a skill one can use to support oneself. My Pasha grandfather, on the other hand, insisted that I should be a poet. One day he said to my father, "Anyone who receives a certain education can become an engineer, a doctor, or a judge. However, I would like my grandson to become a poet. And such a poet," he said. My mother, Celile Hanım, was a famous painter. I enjoyed watching her paint. Then I would take paints and brushes and try to make portraits of the people around me. Thanks to my grandfather, I went my way to poetry, and thanks to my mother, to painting. Many guests came to our house. One of them was Mehmet Akif Ersoy, the poet of our national anthem. I must have been influenced by Akif, who took painting lessons from my mother, because I was going to refer to him as Akif, a great poet, a convinced man in a poem I will write in the future. I was very successful in my school life. After primary school, I went to Galatasaray and then Nişantaşı High School. I learned Persian and French with the suggestion of my father and grandfather, who gave importance to foreign languages. I was also playing very good football, scoring good goals. When people asked me, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" I replied, "The postman," which seemed strange to them, because for me, the postman carried hope and joy. During the First World War, a guest came to our house. This was the Minister of the Navy, Cemal Pasha, who was also a close friend of my grandfather. I had read him my poem, From the Mouth of a Marine. Pasha was very impressed by this and advised me to become a sailor. After that, my education life would continue at Heybeliada Naval School. As the war was drawing to a close, I left the naval school due to my health problems and returned to civilian life. After that, I accelerated my poetry work. Literary circles in Istanbul welcomed my poems with great interest. On March 16, 1920, Istanbul was occupied. The presence of the occupying forces had damaged our national honor. Thereupon, the people of Anatolia increased their desire for independence. Everything would be different now. I would also be the voice of the national struggle with my poems. Life in occupied Istanbul was getting harder and harder. Thereupon, I decided to move to Anatolia and join the national struggle. In January 1921, I left Istanbul with my friend Vala Nurettin. I watched Istanbul for the last time from the deck of the ferry we boarded. While Sarayburnu and the Maiden's Tower were in front of us with all their beauty, on the other hand, the enemy ships that filled the Bosphorus made us sad. After a journey that took 75 hours, we arrived in İnebolu. After visiting the city for a while and getting to know the people, we set out on the foot to go to Ankara on a snowy winter day. I didn't know yet that this journey would add so much to me. During this difficult journey that lasted for 9 days, I got to know the Anatolian people closely. The houses made of mud and wet clay, the peasant women carrying their children covered with dust and dirt on their backs left deep impressions on me. Hunger and disease devastated the villages, and thousands of men who went to war could not return. All the work of the village was left to the elderly, children and women. We arrived in Ankara with all these things engraved in my mind. My friend Valan Nurettin and I were brought before Mustafa Kemal at the National Assembly building. I admired his commanding abilities. Our participation in the National Struggle Front was not accepted. We were assigned to Bolu as teachers because the country needed teachers. During the time we were in Bolu, I had the opportunity to read a lot. I was improving my French with the French books my father sent, and I was learning new trends in European poetry with the books my mother sent from Paris. My mother wanted me to go to Paris with her. She thought I would improve my poetry there. Now it was time to leave Bolu. We had 3 options before us: Paris, Berlin, Moscow. We decided on Moscow. Moscow was a brand new and different world for me. On the other hand, I was trying to get to know the people living here. And on the other hand, I was trying to understand this culture. What I saw and learned in Moscow changed the way I wrote poetry. In this way, it was possible to read my poems more enthusiastically. I returned to Turkey in December 1924. Meanwhile, the War of Independence was over, and the Republic of Turkey was established. The literary movement which I pioneered in this period became the most influential movement in Turkey. For me, true art should show life as it is. The artist should also stay close to life, and his language should be simple and understandable. My first book in Turkey, 835 Lines, was published in 1929. This book was a great innovation for Turkish literature and had an extraordinary success. My most important work is Human Landscape from my hometown. I have discussed many different people I know in my life in this book. Literary critics describe this work of mine as an epic masterpiece. As a child, I said that I loved fairy tales. I have also adapted many fairy tales for children. My books have been translated into many languages and published in many countries around the world. In addition, many of my poems were composed and sang by various artists. Many documentaries and films have been made about me. One of these movies is called as Blue-Eyed Giant. Children, why don't you start to be interested in poetry from somewhere? Perhaps one of you will become one of the great poets of the future. You will discover new worlds or create new world in your own words. Remember, if you work hard, and you can achieve your dreams if you really want to. All you have to do is have faith. You will build a world full of love and brotherhood.